A 1963 Chevrolet Impala painted black, riding low on hydraulics, cruising Crenshaw Boulevard on a Sunday afternoon. That image didn't just define a film, it defined a neighborhood, a culture, and an entire generation's relationship with what a car could mean beyond transportation. And then, when the camera stopped rolling and the credits ran, that car disappeared. Not into a museum, not into a collector's garage with a certificate of authenticity and a velvet rope. It just vanished, and nobody in Hollywood seemed to notice or care. Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle. The cultural context, lowrider history. Before we talk about the film, before we talk about the car, before we talk about what happened to it after production wrapped, we need to go back further, because this car did not arrive in Boyz n the Hood carrying just a build sheet and a set of wire wheels. It arrived carrying 40 years of history. And if you don't understand that history, you don't understand why losing this car matters as much as it does. Los Angeles in the years immediately following World War II was a city sorting itself out, along lines that had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with race. Returning black veterans, men who had fought for a country that still wouldn't sell them a house in certain neighborhoods, settled into South Central and East Los Angeles and built communities from the ground up. And in those communities, the automobile became something it was never designed to be. It became a statement. The lowrider movement grew out of those post-war years organically, quietly, and then with enormous force. Mexican-American and black communities in East LA and South Central began modifying their cars deliberately. Lower ride heights, custom paint, chrome, wire wheels. The work was meticulous, the results were stunning, and the establishment, predictably, decided it needed to be regulated. California passed ordinances in the 1950s, specifically targeting lowriders. Riding below the lowest point of the wheel rim was made illegal. The community's response was one of the great acts of creative defiance in American automotive history. They invented hydraulic suspension systems, electric pumps, and aircraft surplus cylinders that could raise or lower the car on demand. Pulled over? Hit the switch, the car comes up. Cop drives away, ride low again. You cannot legislate away an idea once the community decides it belongs to them. By the 1970s, lowrider culture had its own magazine, its own car shows, its own rituals. Cruising Crenshaw on a Sunday wasn't just an activity. It was a congregation. Cars that had taken months of weekends and serious money to build rolling slow down the boulevard. Windows down, hydraulics occasionally popping one corner up to say hello to someone on the sidewalk. A rolling exhibition of craft and identity that the broader American culture either ignored or misunderstood completely. The 1963 Chevrolet Impala became the platform of choice for this culture, for reasons that were partly practical and partly aesthetic. The body lines on a 63 are almost impossibly clean. Long hood, wide rear deck, a silhouette that drops low and stays elegant. When you chop the suspension on a 63 Impala, the car looks like it was designed that way from the factory. It wasn't. It just happened to be perfect. And perfect things have a way of finding their purpose. That is the tradition that a 23-year-old kid from the Crenshaw neighborhood walked into Columbia Pictures to put on film in 1991. And the fact that Columbia said yes is one of the more remarkable things that happened in American cinema that decade. John Singleton and the making of Boyz n the Hood. John Singleton grew up in South Central Los Angeles. He attended the University of Southern California Film School, which is already a sentence worth pausing on, because USC Film School costs serious money, and it was not exactly overflowing with kids from Crenshaw at the time. Singleton got there on academic scholarship. He was that good, and when he graduated, he had a script. Boyz n the Hood was a semi-autobiographical story set in the neighborhood where Singleton grew up, about three young men navigating a world that was trying to kill them in ways both direct and institutional. The script was sharp, specific, and completely uncompromising. It was also written by someone who had actually lived inside the world it described, and that made all the difference. Columbia Pictures, to their credit, did not hand it to a more experienced director. They handed it to Singleton. He was 23 years old when he made his feature debut. To this day, he remains the youngest person ever nominated for the Academy Award for Best Director. That nomination came from this film. That film came from this neighborhood. And that neighborhood had a specific relationship with a specific car. Singleton shot on location, not in a version of South Central built on a backlot. In the actual streets, Budlong Avenue, Crenshaw Boulevard, the real corners, the real light, the real texture of the place. He cast Ice Cube, who had just left NWA and was operating at a level of cultural credibility that could not have been manufactured, as Darius Baker, known as Doughboy. And he gave Doughboy a car. The choice of car was not accidental. Nothing in Boyz n the Hood is accidental. Singleton was 23, not naive. He understood exactly what he was doing with every frame. And the 1963 Impala he put under Ice Cube communicated volumes before the engine even turned over. The car. The 1963 Chevrolet Impala. Let's talk about the car itself, because it deserves the full treatment. The 1963 Chevrolet Impala, in its factory form, was a full-size American cruiser available in coupe, convertible, and sedan configurations. Under the hood, depending on the trim level, you could get anything from a modest inline-6 to a 409 cubic inch V8 that, in its hottest configuration, produced 425 horsepower. That big block option turned the Impala into a legitimate performance machine while still wearing the body of a family car. That combination, respectable on the surface, dangerous underneath, was not lost on the lowrider community. The 63 also had a body update over the 62 that gave it cleaner rear quarter panels and a more sculpted trunk lid. The taillights became individual round units rather than the bar style of earlier models. Details that sound minor until you see the car in person and realize they are the difference between good-looking and genuinely beautiful. The production Impala for Boyz n the Hood was built as a proper lowrider, custom hydraulic suspension with the pumps and batteries in the trunk, Dayton wire wheels, the chrome spoke variety that catches light and throws it back at you like the car is showing off. Deep black paint finish to a standard that requires serious money and serious time to achieve properly. The interior detailed to match. This was not a budget build. This was a car that said its owner had priorities, and those priorities included doing the work right. And that detail matters enormously for understanding Doughboy as a character. Darius Baker, as written by Singleton and performed by Ice Cube, is not a simple figure. He is someone who has been failed by almost every institution that was supposed to help him: school, the justice system, his own fractured family, and has constructed his identity and his pride around the things he could actually control: his neighborhood, his crew, and his car. The Impala isn't a prop, it's a character statement. It tells you who Doughboy is and what he values before Ice Cube delivers a single line of dialogue. Ice Cube understood this instinctively. And here's the detail that most people gloss over. He wasn't performing familiarity with that car. He grew up around cars exactly like it. Crenshaw was his neighborhood, not a location he drove to from somewhere else. When he leans on that Impala in the film, when he slides into the driver's seat with the ease of someone who has been doing exactly that since he was old enough to reach the pedals, that is not acting technique. That is memory. That is the real thing wearing a costume. I'll be honest with you. That distinction is one of the reasons this car carries more weight than almost any other movie car I have ever researched. The machine, the man, and the neighborhood were all genuinely connected. You cannot fake that. And you absolutely cannot replace it once it's gone. Ice Cube and the Impala. The real connection. Now, let's talk about Ice Cube and the Impala beyond the film, because this is the part of the story most people don't fully know. Ice Cube has spoken publicly on multiple occasions about his relationship with that car. Not in the detached way an actor discusses a prop from 20 years ago, but with a kind of specific affection that comes from a real connection. He has described it as one of his favorite things about making the film. In interviews promoting the movie's anniversary releases, he has come back to the Impala repeatedly, unprompted. And here is the detail that shifts the entire story. According to Ice Cube himself, he purchased the car after production wrapped. He wanted to keep it. That is the kind of thing that happens when the relationship between a performer and a prop transcends the production. He didn't just drive it on camera, he drove it home. Now, this is where the story gets complicated, and where the complications become genuinely painful. Because Ice Cube owned that car, and then the car was stolen. I want to be careful here about precision, because the timeline and specific circumstances have been reported in ways that are not always consistent. And I'd rather tell you what is confirmed and what is murky than fill in the gaps with something that sounds good but might not be true. What is confirmed is this: the car left Ice Cube's possession involuntarily. It was taken. And after that, the trail fractures in ways that have never been definitively resolved. The theft and what it reveals. The theft of the Boyz and the Hood Impala is the moment this story turns from a straightforward movie car history into something genuinely unresolved. And the irony is not subtle. A film set in a community that was being systematically stripped of resources, opportunity, and stability had its most iconic prop stolen from the man who made it famous. The car that represented Doughboy's pride, his ownership of something, in a world that kept taking things from people who looked like him, was taken. I'm not going to overdramatize that connection, but I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist either. Singleton built a film about a community. The community's relationship with the film was complicated. Some residents embraced it, some resented the attention it brought. There were documented incidents of violence at screenings across the country during the opening weekend of 1991, something that contributed to a broader and deeply unfair cultural conversation about what kinds of stories were allowed to be told about which communities. The film's arrival was not quiet, and the car that became its symbol was not quietly maintained. What we know is that after the theft, Ice Cube did not publicly launch a recovery effort in the way that Sylvester Stallone did years later when his Cobra Mercury went missing. There was no lawsuit, no public campaign, no online auction that surfaced it for sale. The car went quiet, and the longer a car stays quiet after a theft, the harder the trail becomes to follow. Understand what this means, practically. A stolen vehicle in Los Angeles in the early 1990s was not tracked the way a stolen vehicle would be tracked today. There was no national database of vehicle identification numbers, cross-referenced with auction sales and insurance claims that a researcher could access from a laptop. If the VIN was changed, if the car was repainted, if it was moved out of state quickly, the chances of recovery dropped dramatically with every passing week, and nobody in Hollywood was watching the clock on this one. The trail goes cold. Here is where I have to be straight with you, because that is the only way this kind of history gets told honestly. The paper trail on the Boyz N, the Hood Impala, after the theft is not clean. It is not clean in the way that the Cobra Mercury's trail was not clean. It is not clean in the way that the Training Day Monte Carlo's trail was not clean. These are working cars built for film productions that were not conceived as cultural artifacts. And the systems that Hollywood used to manage its vehicle inventory in the early 1990s were not built for preservation. They were built for accounting. I have spent time going through forum threads on lowrider community sites, including layitlow.com and impalaofthemonth.com, and various threads on dedicated classic car boards, looking for credible leads on where this car ended up. What I found was a mixture of genuine leads, wishful thinking, and outright mythology. Several posts over the years have claimed direct knowledge of the car's location. None of those claims have been verified with documentation. A vehicle identification number, a title history, a photograph that can be dated and cross-referenced. The kind of evidence that separates a story from a fact. There is a recurring claim in certain corners of the internet that the car resurfaced in the mid-1990s in the Los Angeles area, possibly in the San Fernando Valley, possibly repainted. There is another claim that it was seen at a lowrider show in the late 90s, still wearing the original color or something close to it. Neither of those claims has been documented to a standard I'm comfortable presenting as confirmed. And this is the part that keeps me up at night. Not metaphorically, I mean, I have actually sat at my desk at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, chasing VIN records down dead ends when I should have been doing literally anything else. The honest answer, after all of that, is that the current location of the original production Impala from Boyz n the Hood is unknown. Unknown in the specific sense that no credible, documented, verifiable claim to its location currently exists in the public record. Replicas, tributes, and the cultural afterlife. What does exist in enormous abundance is the car's cultural afterlife. And that afterlife is worth documenting because it tells you exactly how deeply that 1963 Impala embedded itself into the culture it came from. Walk into any major lowrider show from Compton to Houston to Chicago to Albuquerque, and you will find 1963 Impala builds that are, whether their owners acknowledge it or not, in direct conversation with the car from Boyz and the Hood. The deep black paint, the Dayton wires, the hydraulic setup, the clean interior, the stance. These are not generic lowrider choices. These are specific aesthetic decisions that trace back, directly or indirectly, to the image of that car cruising Crenshaw in 1991. The film gave the 1963 Impala a kind of cultural canonization that no advertisement, no magazine feature, and no car show trophy could have provided. It connected that specific body style to a specific emotional truth about a specific community in a specific moment in American history. And once that connection exists, it cannot be severed. The car and the story are permanently fused. This creates a practical problem for anyone trying to identify the original. Authentic tribute builds have become so common, so carefully researched, and so faithfully executed that distinguishing a documented production vehicle from a very good recreation without paperwork is essentially impossible. The community built so many iterations of this car, with such reverence and such skill, that the original can hide inside its own legacy. Which, honestly, if you think about what lowrider culture is, and always has been, a tradition of building and maintaining and passing down knowledge and craft within a community that was repeatedly told its aesthetics didn't matter, there is something almost fitting about that. The original might be gone. The idea is everywhere. That said, I want to be clear. The idea being everywhere does not mean the original doesn't matter. It matters enormously. Film provenance, documented production history, the specific vehicle that Ice Cube drove in the specific scenes that Singleton filmed in the actual neighborhood, that is irreplaceable. And its absence from any known collection, museum, or documented private ownership is a genuine loss for the historical record. Where it might be right now. So, where does that leave us right now, today? The honest answer has three possible versions. One, the car still exists in private hands somewhere, almost certainly in Southern California, owned by someone who may or may not know what they have. The lowrider community has its own systems of provenance and pride that operate entirely outside the collector car market's infrastructure. People in this culture know what they own. They know the history. They keep it close, and they don't necessarily feel any obligation to announce it to the broader world. If someone in South Central, or the San Fernando Valley or Long Beach, is sitting on that car right now, they might have known exactly what it was the day they got it, and they might have zero interest in sharing that information with a YouTube channel, or an auction house, or a journalist. And honestly, I respect that completely. The street gets to keep what the street built. 2, the car exists but no longer in screen-accurate form. Repainted, rebuilt, modified over 30 years by hands that either didn't know its history or didn't prioritize preserving it. This is the most common fate for a stolen vehicle that changes hands multiple times across multiple decades. Each new owner leaves a mark. The original underneath all of it is still there in the form of a VIN, but the visual identity is gone. Recovering and restoring it to screen-accurate condition would require the same kind of frame-by-frame forensic work that Eddie Paul did with the Cobra Mercury stunt car, and it would require someone caring enough to commission it. 3, the car is gone. Not destroyed dramatically on camera, not wrecked by a teenager and traded to a dealership, just quietly dismantled at some point in the last 30 years by someone who needed the parts and had no idea what they were pulling off. This happens. It happens more often than anyone in the film preservation community wants to acknowledge. A 63 Impala has a lot of desirable components. The hydraulic setup alone represents serious money. If nobody flagged this car as significant before it went into the wrong hands, it could have been dissolved into the used parts market without a single person noticing. I genuinely do not know which of those 3 versions is true, and I want you to sit with that for a second because I think it matters. One of the most culturally significant movie cars of the 1990s, a car connected to one of the most important American films of that decade, a car that Ice Cube himself owned and lost, is either in someone's private collection, unrecognizable, or gone. And Hollywood has never mounted a serious effort to find out which. If you have a credible lead, the comment section is open. Not forum mythology, not a post that someone's cousin knew where it was in 2003. A VIN, a title, a documented photograph, a chain of ownership that holds up. That is what finding this car actually requires, and if that lead exists somewhere, I want to hear it. The 1963 Impala from Boyz in the Hood is the rare movie car that was never just a movie car. It was a cultural document. It was a community's aesthetic philosophy, put on wheels and then put on screen by a 23-year-old who grew up watching exactly those cars cruise, exactly those streets. It was owned by the man who drove it in the film, which almost never happens. And it was stolen, which tells its own story about the world the film was depicting. John Singleton passed away in April of 2019 at the age of 51. He never got to see the car recovered or restored or documented the way it deserved. Ice Cube, who owned it and lost it, has not publicly resolved what happened to it. The car remains, as of the time I am recording this, an open question. And open questions are why I do this. My name is Johnny, this is American Muscle, and if this one got under your skin the way it got under mine, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Because somewhere in Los Angeles, or somewhere outside it, a 1963 Impala with a very specific history might be sitting right now waiting for someone to go find it. Let's go find it.